As Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana prepares to table his maiden budget speech, some economists actually expect the minister to maintain most of the current tax regimes. And this on the back, of course, of an economy and fiscus that are recovering from the devastating impact of COVID-19 lockdown regulations. So to help us unpack some of what we can expect and perhaps what the minister should be looking at in today's budget speech, we are joined via Zoom now by Senior Research Fellow at Trade Collective Lebohang Pheko. Ms. Pheko, thanks for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you so much, Sakina, and to the viewers.
It's early in the morning, but of course this is a top of mind for most people today because we know that most South Africans, like I suppose everyone across the world, have really borne the brunt of COVID-19 lockdown restrictions and what has happened consequent to that. But looking at the Finance Minister in his maiden budget speech today, one has to ask the question first and foremost, how much room does he actually have for maneuverability?
So I think after looking at the medium-term budget policy statement, which was quite conservative, right? Some pundits have suggested, he actually, South Africa's fiscal balance is somewhat narrowing. And of course, the windfall that was received last year through the commodities boom, which was quite a serendipity, cannot be relied upon. That has also narrowed somewhat, and the commodities prices have shifted significantly. It's suggested that consolidated government spending is going to be cut, possibly by about 2.2% in the 2022 to 2023 financial year, to about 2.2 trillion rands, just over over 2 trillion rand. And I'm hoping that this means that we're not going to see a decline in expenditure in social and developmental spending. And I'm also hoping that we're not going to see too many more sweetheart moves towards state-owned enterprises. We are expecting that it's going to be a very tax-heavy, corporate-heavy budget. Of course, there was a useful figure that was picked up last year. I mean, there was quite a good budget and tax revenue, but it's going to possibly fall short by over 100 billion rand. So that's basically what the minister is going to be working with today.
So these are the constraints placed upon him, but of course the broader South African populace also have much to expect from this particular budget, because people have been asked to basically tighten their belts. There's no more belt to tighten. Whatever it is that you're asking of people at this point, they will tell you we simply cannot anymore. But what does government do realistically? If we look at, for example, the triple threat that we've been hearing about since time immemorial, unemployment, poverty and inequality, we have failed over many years to address these adequately. And now, on the back of a devastating worldwide pandemic, how does South Africa really turn that tide? Because something has to give, Ms. Pheko.
Yes, it does. So I think what we're seeing is that the 2020 pandemic is really, as what I've been calling, a pandemic upon other pandemics. So what it did is to exacerbate existing fragilities and frailties. It exacerbated existing inequalities. It also illustrated that some of our social and development infrastructure, such as in healthcare, such as in water supply and social logistics, supply of work as well, which I would view as a social logistic. We're really not in order, basically because some of the fundamentals have been premised on the notion that you can build an economy on foreign direct investment. You can build an economy on the vagaries of foreign commodities, and then also that corporates are the ones who are going to lead our national development plan or our national development priorities. In the hope that corporations are going to be able to then bring in enough taxes and create jobs on our behalf. However, if the environment domestically is not such that it has actually been able to be enabling, be inclusive. So be enabling, for example, to small and medium businesses, which is where the majority of work is generated, and also be enabling to people who fall outside of the formally defined work definitions. So people who, at least 60 or 70% of people across the African continent, so that's not a uniquely South African thing, have other forms of employment or of income generation. So people at the traffic lights, or people who are street hawking, or who do work that is not per se recorded by the state fiscus, and that therein lies the rub. Now, these are the people, the entities, the individuals, the communities who were shut down, especially during COVID-19, the earlier days, because of the regulations on social movement and social mobility. What this has done is, as you rightly say, to exacerbate the so-called triplets, poverty and unemployment and inequality. But these were existing triplets, as we very are well aware. The other point is that we then received several loans and several diversions of this fiscus, over 500 billion rand, which was supposed to go towards exactly that, ameliorating and providing relief, the COVID relief fund. So you have your social relief distress grant, the 350 rand, which many social activists and development economists have argued should really grow into something that's a lot larger and more permanent, specifically because we do not know exactly how long it will be before the COVID situation and the COVID hampering begins to recover in the economy. It could be up to 5 years. We're not entirely sure. And we're not actually entirely sure how long COVID is going to be around with the variants in various forms. The other part of that is that, of course, this means that we have to think beyond just the business as usual model. And I've seen a lot of the finance previews saying stuff like, social compacts are well and good, but let's get back to business. How do we get back to business when we have a nation that in over the last 2 years has lost at least 2 million jobs, excluding the many people that I mentioned who are off the grid and who are not counted among the employed or the unemployed? How do we also do that in the context of many households? We've got 11% higher, an 11% increase in household hunger. So many more people have been going to bed tangibly and objectively hungry over the last 2 years, which is extremely distressing. I think statistics at South Africa, which is an entity which I think more of us need to take much more notice of the work that they're putting out, the excellent work that they're putting out, have been putting out data after data that illustrates, of course, unemployment among young people that has increased. And we're also aware that finally that the unemployment rate, the unofficial unemployment rate and the official unemployment rate are actually catching up with each other. I'm of the school of thought which has always thought that we were at over 40%, and the unofficial and the official figures are edging up towards those sorts of numbers, over 28, going up towards 30%.
So just taking a look at what's to come today, you speak of some of the loans that we have in the last while secured as a country. The EFF, for example, today marching against some loans from Bretton Woods institutions. But do we even know how government has actually spent the loans that they did receive, especially in the last 2 years? We hear almost by the by of a loan secured here. Apparently there's another one in the pipeline. But how is that money spent? Have we been able to keep track of that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And again, quite a few development economists have been, trying to really access that information. It was supposed to be around trying to emergency funding to face the academic. There was also supposed to be around how to then add an extra amount into the economy. And at the time, what we estimated was that it was going to add about 600 billion rands to the economy, and that it could shrink this by 6% and it result in a GDP, net debt to GDP ratio of about 70%, which is extremely distressing, to say the least. And remember that when we first received our loans, our GDP growth rate was at about 0.9%. It has increased negligibly since then. Now we're in positive figures, but we're not exactly at 4, 5, 6, 8%. So this was really supposed to deal with countries which had problems of balance of payments, which is how which records how financial countries' transactions compare with the rest of the world. And as you rightly say, the COVID funding of about, over 1.9 trillion rand, really, which was almost the size of the South African budget for all of the 189 member states, was really not something that we were able to then pinned down as to where exactly it has landed, and that's become mired in quite a lot of controversy. I think the other thing that's disturbing and distressing about these sorts of loans is what they cost the economy in the long term. And I think that even though we were told that the latest loan, which arrived in January, as you say, somewhat under discrete circumstances, came without any conditions or with limited conditions. But what we were not told clearly was that, more explicitly, was that one of the conditions of these non-conditions is a reform in the economy. And now a reform in the economy for people who grew up in the era of structural adjustment is kind of structural adjustment light. It would mean that we have to adjust our fiscus. We need to adjust in many respects, possibly our tax base, in order to see where we're going to in future be able to recover these costs. It also means that a lot more is assigned to the cost of paying back the loan, rather than what would be paid to actually dispersing and allocating these resources and the benefits, such as they may be, to the state, to different departments, to building roads, to building hospitals, to producing the vaccine, for example, to ensuring that everybody has running water, since we're all supposed to keep our hands clean, and so on and so forth. And the lack of transparency on this is really quite distressing. I mean, the IMF speaks about this first line of defense to provide financial support to developing countries, and this kind of emergency rapid credit facility. But there is nothing that is without its conditions, and we really need to levitate a bit around what a structural reform of our economy could look like over the next 5 to 10 years, or even beyond that.
Just a final one. If you were advising the Minister of Finance under these very trying circumstances, what would you advise him to do? What would you have him look at first and foremost, especially when we look at a rights-based social compact going forward? You know, you mentioned the issue of running water, for example. That's an inalienable human right, but it's something that we're struggling with.
And I think that the redistribution of public resources is going to face that kind of stiff resistance from powerful actors, which is why it's important to be quite innovative and strong and create quite strong coalitions and social actors around some sort of a social compact for social spending at the moment, in order to then sustain a much more progressive and much more developmental response. So off the top of my head, I would say that we have to look at our energy deficit at the moment. We also have to look at our data deficit at the moment. We do need to be in a situation where it's easy to do business, not only for external actors and corporates, but for us at domestic level. A lot of people are also working from home. So I know that quite a few people are going to be looking at some form of tax adjustment, since their homes are now also offices. I would, though, also that the minister looks much more carefully at redirecting a lot of the loans that perhaps would have been used to bail out state-owned enterprises. I think 62 billion rand, and direct those to the states, to house, education, etc.
Well, Ms. Pheko, thanks so much for your insights this morning. And that was Senior Research Fellow at the Trade Collective Lebohang Pheko. And just basically having a discussion in the lead up to this afternoon's budget speech with Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana in terms of what we can expect and what the material conditions on the ground currently are.